It's a family that has been at the heart of power in Sri Lanka for years. Now the Rajapaksas aim to strengthen their grip as voters go to polls. So how crucial is the election this time? And why does Sri Lanka matter? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Gotabaya and Mahinda Rajapaksa, two brothers who have long shaped Sri Lanka's politics. They're known for their role in ending the 26-year war against Tamil separatists. Now they are seeking to extend their family's rule over the island nation. President Gotabaya's party aims to win a two-thirds majority in Wednesday's parliamentary election. He'll need it to amend the constitution and restore presidential powers curbed under changes to legislation in 2015. The Prime Minister Mahinda wants to be re-elected. Many fear fractures within the opposition could help the Rajapaksas win outright. Such a victory would concern defenders of human rights who accuse them of abusing power, cracking down on dissent. Minel Fernandez reports from Colombo.
Mervyn Veerasinghe's son Dylan was abducted in September 2008. He was one of 11 young men kidnapped to be ransomed. A group within the Sri Lankan Navy, including its highest-ranking officers, have been implicated.
We just want our child. In 12 years, we haven't been told whether he's alive or not. So much information has been uncovered. One can get away. We don't even care if they do. But the officers or whoever allowed this injustice must be punished.
Human rights activists fear this and similar cases involving the disappearances of hundreds of Tamils after the 26-year conflict with the Tamil Tigers will be forgotten when Sri Lankans go to the polls on Wednesday. The Sri Lanka People's Party, led by the Rajapaksa brothers, is expected to win. Both President Gotabaya and Prime Minister Mahinda say they will protect war heroes from prosecution, ensure national security, sovereignty, and bring prosperity.
The President's party must come to power to take this program forward. We require a two-thirds majority for this. There are amendments needed to the Constitution, or else we need to change the Constitution.
Presidential powers were weakened and those of the Parliament strengthened under an amendment passed by MPs in 2015. Analysts say any reversal would be detrimental.
As far as democracy is concerned, if the Rajapaksas get a two-thirds or close enough, all dissent will be out of the window. And therefore you will have a strong authoritarian government. I think the general tendency, the brand, as it were, of the Rajapaksas is that majoritarian and authoritarian dispensation.
But this doesn't seem to worry more Sri Lankans. For many, the Rajapaksas appear the best option, given their handling of the coronavirus outbreak and the negative perceptions of the previous government, including security failures that led to one of the worst bombings in Sri Lanka on Easter Sunday 2019. The main opposition, United National Party, has been ripped apart by infighting and is contesting the election separately.
We do not carry the rotten eggs or the luggage of the past administration. All those miscreants are no more in this alliance. The incompetent people and those who have not exhibited leadership qualities are not included in our alliance. They have become remnants in the political system. So I very fervently and sincerely believe that we possess the requisite capabilities to carry forward the national agenda.
Analysts say low voter turnout is possible as fears of COVID-19 may keep people away from the ballot boxes.
Winning the general election will be the easy part. There are multiple challenges. But a looming economic crisis, aggravated by the coronavirus pandemic, will severely test the next government here in Sri Lanka.
Meanwhile, families like the Veerasinghas try not to lose hope. Minel Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
Let's now get the thoughts of our guests. Joining us in Palipola, Sri Lanka, Dr. Palitha Kohona, former Sri Lankan ambassador to the United Nations. In Colombo, Gihan Gunateleke, researcher at Oxford University. And in London, Vindhya Buthpitiya, researcher at the University College London. A warm welcome to you all. Mr. Palitha, how crucial are these elections? Why should it be considered a turning point in Sri Lankan history?
I think it's a very important election. You know what has happened in this country over the last 5 years. There was total disjoint between the president and the prime minister. The country did not move forward at all. And then having eliminated terrorism in 2009, as you already mentioned, we had one of the worst terrorist attacks on Easter Sunday in 2019. The economy lurched from one deep hole to another. So it's very, very important that these elections will produce a result that will be capable of bringing the country out of the morass it has fallen into. And then the majority of the people expect that. They expect the administration that will be taking over after tomorrow to be capable or able to deal with these multiple challenges. It's very important for Sri Lanka.
Okay.
And I believe that it is also important for the region because it's
we will go into details about the regional implications of the election. Gihan, is there any chance that the SLPP, which is the ruling Sri Lankan Pujana Peramuna party, will secure the two-thirds majority needed for it to move forward and take all the decisions in the near future, including charting a new constitution?
I think it's difficult to speculate on what the outcome of tomorrow's voting would be, because we really don't know what the turnout is going to be. I think it is very likely that the SLPP will do very well in the election. Whether they would secure 150 seats in parliament is anyone's guess. And I'm not in a position to really speculate on the exact numbers. I think they'll get fairly close, but whether they would secure the two-thirds majority after tomorrow's voting is really going to be dependent on the turnout.
Okay. And speaking about the turnout, Vindhya, the SLPP is looking forward to see a higher voter turnout to be able to secure a comfortable lead. We're talking against the backdrop of COVID-19. What kind of impact will the pandemic have on the voter turnout, do you think?
I think if there's an overarching theme in relation to this election, it's probably uncertainty. And certainly the uncertainty has been magnified by the fact that Sri Lanka, along with the rest of the world, has been really put to the test in terms of how it's dealt with a pandemic, as well as, I mean, the kind of social and economic impacts of it as well. And we know that Sri Lanka is in quite a precarious position economically, and this sort of 5 months or so has had significant impact on people's livelihoods in a very kind of everyday sense. So I think the voters will be looking at the way in which they feel this has been managed in the past few months as well. And I think that's definitely going to have an implication for the election. But I agree with Gihan in the sense that I don't think we can predict what the outcome would be, and it would definitely be determined by who shows up to vote tomorrow, because even that involves quite a bit of risk, because we're thinking of, publics gathering, we're thinking about, contact and difficulties in social distancing and so on. So there's going to be a lot of variables, I think, that will determine the outcome.
Palitha, Gotabaya and Mahinda have been talking during the campaign about how they have managed, in a way or another, to contain the outbreak of COVID-19. But for others, giving the army sweeping powers, having them in charge of basically everything in Sri Lanka, isn't this something that could further undermine the basic tenets of democracy in Sri Lanka?
There are 2 points I would like to make in response to your question. One is that Sri Lanka dealt with COVID-19 in a way that is exemplary. We have had only 11 deaths so far, and most of those who've been detected with the infection have returned home, having been cured. This was largely the result of the exemplary work of the health services, our state-funded free health service, and of course, the security services who were responsible for detecting and tracing individuals who were infected. And because of those factors, Sri Lanka is now almost on the verge, and I say this very cautiously because nobody can predict that, on the verge of winning the battle against COVID-19. Now, the second question relating to giving the military or servicemen extensive powers, well, that helped in dealing with COVID-19. It is because we deployed the security services effectively, not in a manner that was oppressive, but effectively.
Yeah, but you know that this is something that has been haunting the Rajapaksas all the time. They are widely seen by the people as trying to militarize the country.
I think you have not been in touch with the people of this country. The average person doesn't care. As long as he's not sick, as long as he's not infected.
Well, this is something that the people, this is something that the people of Sri Lanka will decide when they go to the polls. Gihan, we've been talking about the SLPP, but at the same time, what about the party's rivals, particularly the UNP and the CJB? Do they have any chance to mount a strong challenge against the SLPP?
Again, I think it's important to look at the messaging in the lead up to the election. I think the SLPP has defined the messaging, and the other parties, particularly the SJB and UMP, have been sort of reactive. The unique selling point of these parties have not been particularly clear, whereas some of the smaller parties have actually come up with specific alternatives to what the SLPP is offering. So in a way, I think the two main parties that are contesting the SLPP at this election have been in a battle against each other. And in this context, we may see the results actually showing that internal conflict rather than a clear messaging that contrasts with the SLPP's messaging on security and stability. So I think we're going to see the results reflect that.
Okay, Vindhya, both UMP and SJB had a chance to defend their political platform agenda during the campaign. Instead, they were just backstabbing each other. Is this something that will further deplete the power base of the two opposition parties?
I think so. And I think right now there seems to be a lack of clarity as to what the opposition stands for. And I think this is going to negatively affect them in terms of people aren't really sure what their alternatives are, because there has been a very kind of clear absence of these parties articulating what their stance is and what their plan is, more significantly, especially given the added pressure of this current global moment.
Palitha, the Rajapaksas are widely seen as trying each time to champion the narrative of the Sinhalese Buddhist majority of the country, paving the way for a nationalistic, authoritarian regime in the country. Isn't this just something that could further alienate the other minorities in the country?
I think Sri Lanka has a Buddhist majority, and it is quite possible that most of them will vote for the Rajapaksas. And as Vindhya already mentioned, opposition is not mounting a campaign that is credible. Many people have questioned whether we will have a proper opposition after the elections. In a democracy, you need an opposition, you need a strong opposition. But as to whether we will end up with one is another question. Whether the minorities are worried about the Rajapaksas, I believe that there is a campaign which highlights the fact that the minorities are or should be worried about the Rajapaksas. I can't see why this suggestion should be made. there are many members of the Muslim community and the Tamil community behind Mahinda Rajapaksa, as they have been seen on platforms with Mahinda Rajapaksa. And it is quite possible that the minorities who also look for stability and predictability, stability security-wise, predictability economy-wise, will prefer the Rajapaksas to the opposition, which is in sixes and sevens at the moment.
All right. Vindhya, for the Tamils, what's next, given the fact that if Rajapaksa wins, amends the constitution, curbs the powers of the provincial councils, they are most likely going to lose a lot in the near future?
I mean, I think there are very real reasons for people to be concerned. And I think the fear is something that is relevant given, you know, the long history of the way in which the Sri Lankan state, and particularly the Rajapaksa government, have dealt with issues to do with transitional justice demands and other political grievances coming from the Tamil community. And we know that militarization and securitization has disproportionately affected the north and east of the island. And this is something that people have to live with and reckon with every day. So not wanting to, you know, live in such a situation or with such fears constantly is understandable. But I think it's very difficult to say what a kind of viable alternative will be, given also this kind of complication with the opposition and the kind of challenges that we are dealing with this year. Particularly, I'm thinking mostly in relation to things like livelihood, which has consistently been a problem in the north and east in terms of access and so on. And it has gotten much worse this year with the kind of, you know, very strict curfews, which I understand may have been necessary in order to control it. But at the same time, you know, we're thinking about people's everyday needs, ability to survive, you know, next meal for the family.
Let's talk more about the other minorities. And this is going to be my question for Vindhya. Vindhya, when it comes to the Muslims, they feel that they have been sort of demonized by the political establishment against the backdrop of the 2019 Easter bombings. Is this something which is going to just further isolate them?
I think one of the things that has kind of continued unchecked is a lot of political rhetoric that demonizes minorities. And while there are all these sort of very glib proclamations made about how Sri Lanka is inclusive and celebrates diversity and so on, I think we see a significant contradiction in this, particularly in relation to election campaigning, where we see, again, majority candidates demonizing, criticizing minority communities. And we've also seen this happen, you know, since the end of the war consistently. So it's nothing new, if anything, magnified by last year.
Let's go now to Gihan. Gihan, if the SLPP wins an outright majority, the party will move forward to amend the constitution, and by that they're definitely going to give the presidency sweeping powers, paving the way to what amounts to an authoritarian rule. What would be the general sentiment among the people in Sri Lanka if that happens?
So I actually want to agree with Dr. Kohona, who mentioned that a functioning democracy really needs a good opposition. And I think that's a really important point. And we need to remind ourselves that an opposition exists in Parliament. Now, the fact that we're having an election despite a public health challenge is admirable, and I think it's the right thing to do. But it's been necessitated by an early dissolution of Parliament. Remember, Parliament was dissolved 6 months before its term came to an end. It was dissolved on the 2nd of March. Because the government lacked a majority in Parliament, it was, of course, the politically astute thing to do. But this situation became irregular when it turned out that the country couldn't have an election due to COVID-19. So in such a situation, the Constitution actually provides for the resummoning of Parliament for an emergency session. Now, that option wasn't taken. So we neither had a Parliament nor an election. And in fact, we didn't have an elected legislature for more than 150 days in this country. So I'm actually quite pleased that an irregular situation is now being rectified and we'll have a new parliament by the 20th of August. So in a sense, we would need a functional opposition in order to really ensure that
that is as far as as domestic politics are concerned. Let's move forward to the regional and international context of these elections, if you don't mind. Palitha, this is going to be monitored by everyone, and if the Rajapaksas secure a comfortable lead, control everything, the legislation along with the presidency, many people would be concerned, the Indians in particular, because they consider the Rajapaksas to be politically and economically beholden to the Chinese.
Again, well, let me start with India. You recall that when President Rajapaksa, Gotabaya Rajapaksa was elected, it was the Indian foreign minister who called on him within a few days. I do not think that the Indians are particularly concerned about the Rajapaksas. The Rajapaksas got on very well with India before the end of the conflict. And in fact, if not for Indian blessings, it is quite likely that the conflict would have continued for much longer. So I think it's a wrong characterization.
I don't think it's a wrong characterization. And I'll tell you why. Because the Indians have been expressing concerns about the Chinese using military assets like Hambantota and Colombo ports. I mean, this is fact.
You could say that about anybody, the Chinese or anyone else. We have some very good harbors. We have got an excellent or two excellent airfields. You could say that about anybody. Why the Chinese? And of course, let me get on to the China issue. Sri Lanka,
very briefly, if you don't mind, because we're running out of time, please.
Let me finish with the Chinese,
sure.
And then you can pose another question. When the conflict ended, Sri Lanka needed funds to develop. We needed funds desperately and very quickly. We turned to every possible lending agency, the World Bank, the IMF. Then we turned to the West and to India. No funds were forthcoming. So we had to turn to the one country that had spare cash to give us. And China did. And it doesn't mean that we fell under the tutelage of the Chinese. China gave us the funds. We used the funds for development purposes.
Very briefly, I'm going to go.
And then
I have to go now to Gihan. Gihan, is this something which is going to, a win by the SLPP, is it going to further bolster the status of China in Sri Lanka?
I mean, the government hasn't made any, it's not made a mystery of its relationship with China. We've definitely seen an increase in that relationship being put on display. I think there's no doubt that that's one of the unique selling points of this government, its close relationship with China. But of course, I do think that it has also displayed a close affinity to India, and there is that balancing act that is taking place in the region. So I don't think that there would be a gravitation towards China at the expense of the relationship with India. The president himself has expressed a lot of admiration for the Prime Minister in India. So I think there will be a balancing act. The question to ask is whether there would be a marginalization in terms of Western interest. And I think that's where there would be questions raised as to whether on the global front, Sri Lanka would be able to retain its historical position as a non-aligned nation. And I think that's an important move, an advance that needs to take place in the next 5 years.
And that's why
to maintain that neutrality.
Sure, and that's why other countries like Japan and the United States of America will be looking forward to see what happens next in Sri Lanka. It's such a complex political landscape. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we'll definitely revisit the story in the coming days. Palitha, Kohona, Gihan, Gunateleke, and Vindhya, Buthpitiya, thank you very much indeed for your contribution to the program. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.